Hello, and welcome to this edition of Lift Every Voice, a program of the Louisville branch NAACP in which we seek to keep our community informed of things that are happening around our community that impact us, because we believe an informed community is one that is best served and get the services that it needs. The Louisville branch NAACP is working to secure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of rights in order to eliminate race-based discrimination and ensure the health and well-being of all persons through this program, Lift Every Voice. The NAACP is the oldest, the baddest, the boldest, the most loved, the most hated, the most feared, most revered civil rights organization in the world. And we're that because we get things done. Today's show will focus on the work the Louisville branch NAACP is doing to ensure the health and well-being of all people. To that end, the branch has established a health committee and recently created an ad hoc committee on the COVID-19 vaccination program. Our recent activities have included a press conference with the governor, emphasizing the need for our community to take the vaccination program. And we have also engaged with the Metro Mayor in regards to what the city is doing in terms of making vaccination available and addressing disparities. So we're privileged today to have a very special guest with us, and that is Dr. Beverly Gaines, who chairs the NAACP Health Committee. Dr. Gaines is a local pediatrician well known to many in this community. She's a community engager and supporter. She's a former state health commissioner, and she also has a philanthropic bent, that meaning that she supports causes with her resource. In other words, she is committed. Dr. Gaines, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Burse.
Okay. So I guess we begin this by having a general discussion in terms of starting with how long have you been involved with the NAACP?
I would say through the years, and all my adult years, maybe more active than sometimes than others, as my education and a career have demanded other things. And as the chair of the health committee, I assumed that role in January. We're now 15 members, health professionals from across disciplines. And our primary objective is to make sure that the NAACP members and the community receive good information on health, wellness, disease prevention. We promote health policy and disparities. And disparities are diseases that affect the African American and other minority communities at a disproportionate rate to their numbers in the population.
When you talk about the scope in terms of addressing disparities as it relates to minority, Black, and brown people in our community, when you look at that, if you had to measure success, how would you measure that?
Well, you look at the wellness or the health status of that population. And unfortunately, this is a very sad story. In 1985, Secretary Margaret Heckler wrote, she was the Secretary of Health and Human Services at the time. She issued a report on Black and minority health. In that report, there were 6 diseases that accounted for 80% of the deaths in African Americans and other minorities. And if you fast forward to 2021, those 6 diseases are still disparities in the African American and other minority populations. And those 6 diseases have been joined by other disparities like COVID, like asthma, like infant mortality, and babies being born prematurely and having more developmental delays. If you talk about measuring, we've not had any improvement, and that's not really fair. We've had some improvement, and some things have changed a little bit positive, a little bit more negative, but overall, the health status of African Americans and other minorities in this country is still poor. We do not have what we call health equity. Health equity is defined as people being able to achieve optimal health, and we do not have that.
In terms of the disparities, one of the major issues affecting the interests of minority groups, particularly Black and brown people today, which is a priority, is COVID-19. What
Yeah.
is your committee doing in this area?
Well, first of all, we've gotten very involved I represent the NAACP on the task force on vaccine distribution. That's the mayor's task force, or we call it the Louisville Public Health and Wellness Task Force on COVID 19 vaccine distribution. A long name. Of course, that's being controlled by the federal government and our governor, and so, to some degree, our local officials. And we look and evaluate how well we're doing at immunizing the entire community.
Coming up next.
But when you really study the lives and the generations of African Americans in particular, we have what you call multi-generational trauma.
Post-traumatic slave syndrome is an explanatory theory that really looks at multi-generational trauma. When we look at multi-generational trauma, we're looking at people who are maybe victims of natural disasters and their families and their children and generations of folks who have experienced war. And we know that there are residual mental, emotional, traumatic impact. And what I did was I started to look at the African American experience, starting with slavery. When you start looking at the simple biology, you start looking at the impact of stress on health. And while we look at general stress, we know finances, you have illnesses, all these different things. How about being Black? How does factoring in being Black in America impact your stress level and therefore your body's ability to operate its own immune system? Because we know it compromises the immune system. Once you understand it, then you can deal with it. Because you see, it's habitual. You socialize. It becomes part of your being. So one of the ways you begin to address that multi-generational trauma is to work with the people it directly impacts, to hear from them. And when you give the people the information, they can use it.
One of the big things or hurdles in our community is it goes all the way back to the Tuskegee experiment, which is vaccine hesitancy.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. We have probably some hesitancy as a result of the Tuskegee Institute, but when you really study the lives and the generations of African Americans in particular, we have what you call multi-generational trauma, starting with slavery, going through the Jim Crow days, going through civil rights and the beatings that we had, and now with COVID, because we know that people with COVID, African Americans, are sicker and more likely to die. However, now that the data is available to us, what we've discovered is that we're not immunized at a rate of proportion to our numbers in the population. So your question was about hesitancy.
Yeah.
There's probably some hesitancy involved, but I think most people agree, and I think the health committee agrees. And probably, as we make our reports to the full body of the NAACP, I think they would agree that it's not so much hesitancy anymore as barriers. For some reason, we had numerous reports of African Americans calling all the lines to get their vaccine, but they would not get a call back. They would not get an appointment. So this is what we call barriers. When you do interviews actually with people in the community, they want the shot. What they were having difficulty with was getting the shot.
So how do you address the barriers? And can you talk a little bit more specific about what those barriers are?
Well, the first barrier is going to be getting the community to recognize, the general, full community, recognize that we treat people differently. That you hear reports of vaccination sites in the West End with primarily Caucasian Kentuckians being served. That's a barrier. How did it occur? I think the whole COVID pandemic, the COVID infection, why it's more severe, that's going to take some time. But clearly, some people have more access to information about even sites in the West End and take advantage of that at the perhaps expense of African Americans. And that's one form. The second is whatever's happening on these telephone lines. I think there's some, and we're the special committee of which you and I both serve on. We've looked at that when you call, what's happening that we're hearing from people saying they don't get the call back, they don't get the appointment, they're being told it's not their time. That's another barrier of what's happening on the communications between the vaccinators and the people wanting to be vaccinated.
So how do we address those things? How do we make real change take place? Because when you look at the numbers from across the state of Kentucky, and even the numbers for Jefferson County,
Right.
we're not getting vaccinated at our same percentage in terms of our percentage in the population. So we're not being able to get the vaccine as we should. What are the kinds of things should we be doing, or what kinds of things should we be encouraging our community to engage in?
Several Sundays ago, that's a great question, Dr. Burse. Thank you. Several Sundays ago, Dr. Cosby gave a message, and it was on power and not African Americans not being afraid to empowering themselves and demanding. And for us on the health committee and the NAACP, it's our job to get the information out. It's for the community's responsibility to take that information, uptake that information, and implement change. And I think the biggest thing is that we have to promote awareness of where discrimination may be occurring, that we tell people it's okay, empower yourselves, demand. It's not a bad word to say, I need to be empowered, or I demand empowering. Or you can't demand empowering. You can demand of yourself that you empower yourself. That was the message that Dr. Cosby gave in one of his sermons. And I found that especially helpful because a lot of people are afraid to use the word power. We don't feel like we really have power, but we do. But we do.
So I think when you talk about the exerting your power in doing that, one of the probably most effective method is the communications. What I have found is that in terms of vaccination sites around the community, for at least among people I see, it's sort of word to mouth from people we know, not a broad-based communication plan or communication effort in terms of addressing our community. How do we change that?
That's a good question and a difficult question because the way the pandemic caught the public unaware. And so therefore, we've had, they're now called pop-up sites,
Yeah.
and they are limited in how many people they can reach. But even in the larger sites that were developed, like the hospitals, University of Louisville, Norton Healthcare System, even those, they have their communication channels in one silo, and the other one will have it in another silo. So people had difficulty getting a central calendar for all the sites. The governor has done an excellent job of promoting awareness, increasing vaccination sites, having a state site for where vaccinations you can find them. But still, there are pockets of activity that only that local community knows about. And I'm not sure how we can unite them right now unless we got all the powers to be in all these systems together and said we're going to put our information in one calendar. And I know the special committee of the NAACP has asked for that, but I think it's just the way the whole pandemic caught us. The fast pace it is now with implementation and giving people vaccinations, it's a little difficult to get that coordination that we need.
And so as we think about these kinds of things, we talk about what additional can the NAACP do or be doing to, in fact, bring about a greater awareness of the availability of vaccination and really to push targeted vaccination to our community, which has not occurred.
Great question. Let me see if I can address that.
Okay.
First of all, um, when you have a pop-up site like the one you're saying at Whitney Young, we as a health committee and as an NAACP special committee and the NAACP are using our communication to our members, our executive committee, to our general membership, and to the community via our website by putting that information there. Now, your point is very well taken. How many people know that that information is there? So it behooves us to do public awareness and awareness about utilize the NAACP. When you have a barrier, call the NAACP. It is the oldest organization in this country that works with our civil rights and access to health care and equitable access are amongst our most basic civil rights.
Okay. I guess when I first moved to Louisville, Beverly, I stayed down the street from Dr. Ralph Morris.
Ah, yes.
And one of the things that I was very much aware of was the Falls City Medical Society, which
Yes.
existed, and it was the Black physicians in Louisville who got together and did some things. One of the things that I have been made aware of is that organization is reorganizing itself. Will you talk to us a little bit about the Falls City Medical Society?
Sure. Thank you. Um, First of all, let me speak a couple minutes on Dr. Ralph Morris.
Yeah.
As I'm chairing the health committee, I'm reading everything that I can about disparities, about how to gain access, communication, and I came upon an article written in the National Journal. I think it was the National Medical Association Journal in 1987. This was 2 years after the report from the Heckler report that identified so many disparities. And Dr. Morse, being a pioneer, along with the others in this community, Dr. Moses, Dr. Bell, there were so many active people, wonderful people in this community. He wrote an article. And the sad thing is that these things have not changed. NMA, the Falls City Medical Society, is the local chapter of the National Medical Association, which is the association that represents all African American physicians in this country. Now, do African American physicians have a big challenge? Yes, they do. They only represent, in some studies, people will say 3 to 5, some people will say 5 to 6% of all the doctors in the country. Yet, depending on where we're located, we may have 12% of the population African American or other minorities. Usually, African Americans and Hispanic Americans are about equal, around 12 something percent in a community. But your question was about Falls City. Falls City did suffer, I believe. Yes, it was very active. Dr. Eubanks, Dr. Moses, there are some pioneers that really charted the course and had an impact on the society, our general society, and our general health in the African American community. Over the years, as doctors were increasingly employed by larger corporations like the Nortons, like the U of L, the focus of the African American physicians, which was initiated by not having access in those other systems.
Right.
Back when Jewish Hospital first started taking patients with Medicare and African American citizens, the societies were formed because African American physicians couldn't get on the medical societies. On the medical staffs of these hospitals, or to be, an integral part of the whole general medical community. That is what brought us together initially. That got a little disrupted as people getting older, some dying off, but the younger generation increasingly taking options in corporate, quote unquote, healthcare. Now, the organization Falls City Medical Society, under the leadership of Dr. Louis Hargett, they are refocusing. And in fact, the health committee makes a presentation to them next week. that they are refocusing on what does the community need. Because as the health committee has said, there are so many things we need. It is just, it can blow your mind. And a lot of times we don't talk about just health disparities. We just talk about equity
Right.
because we don't have equity, which is having the same as other populations have. We don't have it in nearly any arena, not legal. Social justice has really been pointed out in the last couple years as we're still going through the trial of Mr. Floyd. So, there's so many inequities that it permeates our economics, where we live. You asked me about what should NAACP do about the particular needs in the African American community. Well, it has long been identified that transportation is a problem. And so in every report, nearly, you'll see discussed mobile clinics. But where are the resources? I've been trying to track down the resources myself for 2 months
Right.
to try to get us a mobile clinic.
Right.
And we can't get a mobile clinic. And those who have mobile clinics sort of have, their own prioritization and their own schedules. So, but we know that African Americans have a transportation issue. We also have an issue with being more homebound than non minorities. And so it is difficult to say, but people are starting to talk about institutional racism, whereas there is the inequity of resources, access to resources, millions. The report that I referenced earlier, the Heckler report, it was to guide the federal government in how to spend money and how to develop programs to address disparities. Okay. Out of that report, a year later, the Office of Minority Health was formed. That they identified that we use more ER, more hospital-based care than primary care. And as a result, the hospitals got a special fund to subsidize our care. The only people that really didn't get a good uptake from it were African Americans and other minorities, because the federal government has guided programs, programmatic focus, policy, and resources. Millions and millions of dollars have been spent, though we're no healthier.
Well, one of the things that your committee is doing and you're doing personally, and that is to get as many African Americans independent physician, I'll call you independent because you're not part of one of the big networks, is to get you all qualified and to be able to do the vaccination itself. So that is, in fact, a very, very positive thing in terms of what you personally doing as well as your committee is doing. So, we need to continue to push to do that. I guess the other thing is, your health committee is one of the committees of the NAACP, and
Right.
all of our committees are in fact made up of volunteers. I know you've got a committee now. I think you got 13 or 15 people on it. So the question is, do you need any more committee members?
Yes, we do. And I open that invitation at every opportunity. In fact, we just added 2 psychiatrists to the committee, social services, legal people. Health equity involves almost housing people, transportation people, social justice, social work. And the one that bothers me, well, as a pediatrician, it's most problematic that African American children are more likely to be born premature and twice as likely to die in the first year of life than non minorities. Their mothers are more likely to have complications of pregnancy. The maternal mortality, people who die mothers who die in pregnancy, is 2 to 3 times that of non minorities. So what we really need to do and what we're hoping to do is through policy changes, but who's at the table? We want to change who's at the table. Who really knows the nuts and bolts of what's wrong in our community? I've been dealing with the fragile population for almost 40 years now. I know them. My colleagues that look like me know them. But in a larger system, are they better off? No. But you're right. As independent physicians, even though we appear to be somewhat endangered species, we need to bring more of us back. And we need to have people that look like us take care of us, because what studies have shown, the more I relate to you, the more likely I am to give you the care I would give somebody that is like my brother or sister.
Okay.
And studies have shown when you have a non-minority provider taking care of a minority patient, there are some differences in thinking that occur that make the care different, the treatment different.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, let me say, we really thank and appreciate you bringing this. We'll have to bring you back, because I think we could talk for days and weeks about
Yeah.
disparities in the African American community and how we as a people and as a group address those. And we're very, very appreciative of you and the Health Committee and the NAACP for what you are all are now doing. So thank you for being with us. We've come to
Thank
the
you
end
for
of
inviting
our
us.
time.
Okay.
And again, I want to thank you for that. But we also want to talk. One of the things that you heard Dr. Gaines talk about was having committee members and volunteers. The NAACP, through its committees, are all volunteers. So if you're interested in becoming a volunteer or working on any committee at the NAACP, you can reach us by calling our office at 502-776-7608.
Mhm.
Or you can go to our website, which is lounaacp.org, and be able to register there. You can also join through memberships. If you go to that site, it will tell you what the various memberships of the NAACP are, and we encourage you to do that.
Yes.
In addition to being very, very involved in health and ensuring the health of our community, we're also involved in education. And one of the biggest programs that the NAACP does is we run a scholarship program. And that program, scholarship application process, is now open. And I encourage you to go to the NAACP website where that application is, complete it and fill it out. Because last year the NAACP gave over $30,000 in scholarships. Over the last 10 years has given more than $250,000, and we're going to be giving away scholarships this year. So we encourage you to go to their website and apply for the NAACP scholarship. Our ability to get anything done is based on having individuals and members involved, and we need you. The NAACP is fighting every day for your rights, whether they're in health or in education, and the ability to do that. We know that we cannot do it alone. It takes all of us involved, all of us engaged to be able to do that. And when we fight together, we're able to lift every voice. Thank you again for joining and being with us.
I am the largest,
the oldest.
I am the baddest,
the boldest.
I am protecting our voting rights
and our environment.
I am ending racial profiling
and fighting HIV/AIDS.
I am advancing economic equality
and equality
for all.
I am.
I am.
I am.
I am NAACP. Are you?
Take a stand at IamNAACP.org.